4 May 1945. Hamburg. A kitchen off Steinstrasse with a missing window and a tea glass of rainwater. A German civilian named Karl writes a line he will not read aloud for 20 years. I cheered the flags, I smelled the smoke, and now I call myself innocent. He writes it in pencil. He writes it in a school notebook salvaged from the rubble of a neighbor's house. He signs only with an initial. There is no space in the city for a sentence like that. There is no safe audience. The British enter Hamburg the next day. They declare a curfew. They place machine gun nests at intersections and post signs in English and German warning against weapons, cigarettes, and fraternization. The military government's daily log for 6 May 1945 records the ambient state of the city in precise terms. Population exhausted. Food stocks critical. Food stocks critical. Sanitation compromised. The British intelligence summaries from May call the atmosphere subdued, fearful, compliant. They note that the port facilities are a wreck, the warehouses stripped and burned, the cranes crippled. They note that the police, wearing new armbands, report their own men for party membership to prove their usefulness. Karl stands in the doorway of his building and watches the first British patrol go by. He is 37 years old. He wears someone else's coat. His wife, Lotta, is missing. The last he heard from her was a letter from an evacuation train to Mecklenburg in February. No return address. His mother is dead. She died in the July 1943 firestorms, one of the thousands who ran for the canals and fell in heaps along Amsingstrasse and in Hamburg. He could not claim her body. A municipal report lists her among those presumed dead, based on dental records and the identification of a metal knitting needle found near a charred basement. The Bundesarchiv holds a typed list from September 1943 that tallies 34,350 dead from the Operation Gomorrah raids and speaks of fire temperatures sufficient to fuse clinker in cellars. The arithmetic of heat replaces the names of the dead. Hamburg is a city of rubble and silence. It has become the textbook case for ruin. Blocks are flattened without beginning or end. The Archbishop of Canterbury will later visit and call it a lunar landscape. But for now it is not poetry. It is stone, mortar, dust, bent tram rails, a church spire that stands like a finger, St. Nikolai, left as a memorial to fire. The survivors call it Trümmer. The women call themselves Trümmerfrauen. They pick up bricks and clean them with small hammers and stack them in careful rows. They are efficiency, disguised as grief. The British enforce a weapons turn-in week. The city turns in rifles, pistols, ceremonial daggers, a handful of grenades, and a bundle of parade flags. There are also daggers in drawers that no one admits. The occupation reports note cooperative behavior, limited incidents of looting, and extensive bartering. The black market is not new. It becomes the economy. The mathematics of food is simple enough to terrify. Calorie allocations are recorded in municipal tables, 1,500 per day in May, then 500, then 500, then 1,000 by the winter of 1946-47. The hunger winter is named in advance by the American quartermaster reports, which warn of bad harvests and frozen transport lines. There is a sentence that keeps showing up in British memos. Without the port fully functioning, the city is unsustainable. There is a sentence that appears in Karl's notes. It is possible to be grateful for bread from men you feared. Ration cards are issued. There are A cards and B cards, cards for heavy labourers, and cards for office workers, cards for children, cards for invalids. There are bonus allotments for the Trümmerfrauen who meet daily quotas, so many bricks cleaned, so many meters cleared. The black market breaks the logic of the cards and imposes another. A carton of American cigarettes becomes a unit of account. A packet of Chesterfields can be exchanged for a watch, a coat, a bicycle, a chicken. Karl learns the exchange rates. He writes them down in a neat hand, columns and numbers like a ledger. Bread, 12 Reichsmark official, 2 cigarettes in the market. Potatoes, 2 RM, 1,002 cigarette per kilo. Boots repair, 8 RM, a single lucky strike and a promise. There are British patrols on the bridges at night. There are curfews at 9. There are pass checks. The occupation files record rumors of retribution and the measured reality of it. In some towns, people are forced to watch films of the camps. In Hamburg, the British bring trucks to the city squares and set up screens. They show newsreels from Bergen-Belsen taken by British camera crews just 3 weeks earlier. The set faces the crowd. A soldier reads a statement in German and English, you must know. The films are not art. They are proof. The faces in the square do not react in unison. You can read the strategies of self-preservation on them, like annotations in a ledger. Some weep. Some look away. Some tell themselves the camera lies. Some tell themselves the camp is somewhere else, not here. But the camp is near. Neuengamme is 20 kilometers southeast, and its subcamps were folded into the edges of the city. British occupation files from June list a visit to the site. The military government officer writes, the stench remains, the structures stripped. He notes that German civilians from surrounding villages were brought to see it on orders. He also notes that the city authorities express shock and put that shock into minutes and resolutions. Hamburg's Senate is still a provisional thing in May, but it convenes and declares that a new Germany must be a Germany of law. The phrase is noble and necessary and also a cover. It allows what must be done immediately, the allocation of bread and bricks, to sit next to what should be done carefully but cannot be done carefully but cannot be done fully. The mathematics of guilt begins as a form. Denazification is a questionnaire. It is called a Fragebogen. It is 25 pages long in the American zone, shorter in the British, with variations. It asks for memberships, positions held, donations made, associates known. It asks for dates and signatures. In staff meetings, British officials say, "We need a working police force, a working postal service, a working port." The Allied Control Council issues directives to remove party members from key positions. The categories are laid out, coded as a matrix running from major offender to exonerated, hauptschuldig, belastet, minder belastet, Mitläufer, entlastet. The Spruchkammerung, in the American zone tribunals of Germans under Allied oversight, will apply them with rigor and then with fatigue. In the British zone, Hamburg included, panels exist, but the process is thinner, the paperwork heavier, the standards shifting. Karl fills out his form in July 1945. He lists his job as clerk in shipping office 1935 to 1943. He lists party membership as none, which is true. He lists membership in the National Sozialistische Volkswohlfahrt, the National Socialist People's Welfare Organization, as contributor, which is also true. He lists the fact that he worked in an office that processed import papers for a firm that received contracts through the Reich Ministry of Economics. There is a line where he might have written that he helped falsify cargo manifests in 1942 to hide the removal of forced laborers from a legal category of transport. He does not write it. He notes that he was called up in 1943 for civil defense. He does not note that he spent a week standing guard over a factory yard where foreign workers were kept behind a fence, and that he looked away when the supervisor used a stick. The British intelligence summaries comment on these forms with a tone that is equal parts cynicism and necessity. "Everyone is a follower," writes one officer. "Everyone claims to have been apolitical." The files show a pattern. Teachers, policemen, minor functionaries all turn Mitläufer. The mathematics of guilt becomes a budget of excuses. The major offenders are rare and dealt with. The offenders negotiate. The lesser offenders and followers are absorbed back into the economy. Because the port has to move, the mail must go out, the city must be rebuilt. A superintendent fired in June returns in October because the new man cannot do the job. A school principal is removed for propaganda, then reinstated as a teacher of mathematics. The British decide to prioritize competence over purity. It is a grown-up decision. It is also a compromise that will define the next 20 years. The immediate aftermath has a soundtrack. It is the clink of bricks into wheelbarrows. It is the ring of small hammers. It is the footfall of women on the steps of cellars as they go down to dig for something that might be saved: a photograph, a sewing machine, a saucepan. The women saved the city, someone will say later. The men were either gone or silent. That is a clean story. It is also an incomplete one. The Municipal Office for Public Works keeps a ledger of hours worked by Trümmerfrauen. It also records the names of male foremen, who assign them to sections and monitor quotas. Some foremen were party members yesterday. Today, they are indispensable. On 12 July 1943, during the firestorm of Operation Gomorrah, the air over Hamburg was supposed to burn at 800 degrees Celsius. The Bundesarchiv file that collates post-war engineering studies includes tabular estimates based on observed patterns of destruction and human observation. Wind measured at 150 km/h, one line reads, glass melted, iron railings soft. The RAF after-action reports speak of unprecedented fire behavior and target trajectory achieved. The words target trajectory achieved. The words target and city sit beside each other like neighbors under forced cohabitation. 4 nights and 3 days of bombing and fire left nearly 1 million homeless. The RAF's mathematics in operational orders was crisp. It had to be. They measured tonnage dropped per acre, fire load, expected kill area, updraft speed. The promised effect was an outcome called a firestorm. The achieved effect is recorded in the bland confidence of the Staff College. 10 years after the war, one of the men who flew in those raids will come back and stand under the spire of St. Nikolai. That is the shape of this story. But it is not yet time to bring him. First, there are trains from the east. The displaced come in waves. Millions of Germans are expelled from Silesia, East Prussia, the Sudetenland after 1945. Schleswig-Holstein will take in a higher percentage than any other land in the West, but Hamburg receives its share. Municipal registers list names by the hundreds of thousands: widows with 2 children, grandparents with a trunk and a blanket, a boy who arrived alone and was lodged in a school gymnasium with a number on his chest. The Allies call them expellees. The Germans call them Vertriebene. The bureaucracy calls them Neuaufgenommene. The numbers are relentless and specific. The British occupation reports calculate that by 1946, the population of Hamburg has swollen with arrivals by 100,000. They note that housing is already impossible. The arithmetic of rooms becomes a civic obsession. There is a man at the housing office who writes down room numbers in pencil and erases them in pen. This is not an aberration. It is policy shaped by scarcity. Flats are divided with planks and blankets. A family of 3 is assigned 1 room plus corridor use. A displaced family is billeted with a widow who keeps a photograph of her husband on the nightstand and says nothing, while strangers place their trunk at the foot of her bed. There are fights, insults, grudges that will last 10 years. There are letters to the authorities complaining that the newcomers are loud, ungrateful, different. There are letters from expellees that describe being called Prussians as an insult. The officers of the British military government log the complaints, categorize them as tension, economic tension, cultural, and recommend firm administrative measures. There is no policy for teaching one mother to share a stove with another mother whose children cry at night in a dialect she does not recognize. Karl, because he is a man who can write clearly and make columns of figures add up, is offered work at the Wohnungsamt, the housing office, in October 1945. He becomes a clerk with a desk that shakes when carts pass outside. His job is to allocate rooms. He reads ration card numbers and card categories and cross-references them with addresses. He is forbidden to accept gifts. He learns the tastes of his colleagues. He learns that a few pieces of coal, a bolt of dress fabric, a tin of British jam can bend a waiting list. He tells himself that his decisions are based on need. He writes the names in the ledger with care. He keeps a second notebook at home and writes the other names in it, the names of those he refused, the reasons he told himself, the reasons he will not admit. The arithmetic of rooms is cruelty disguised as bureaucracy, he writes one night. He is not sending this sentence to anyone. He does not show it to his supervisor. He knows that the war has moved from the sky to the desk. The DP camps appear in the city like post-war villages. Displaced persons, mostly Jews, but also Poles, Ukrainians, Balts, former forced laborers and POWs, live in schools, hospitals, barracks. They fly their own flags. They print newspapers in Yiddish and Polish. They go to services and funerals. They organize committees that demand restitution and emigration. The British military police guard the gates and count heads. Hamburg has DP camps at the edges and in the middle. A school near Karl's office houses a group of Polish DPs. They put their own sign on the door in their language. The German neighbors do not go near it. The DP camp near Bergedorf receives survivors from Neuengamme and its subcamps. They are thin. They wear donated coats and shoes that do not fit. They work as tailors and carpenters inside the camp. They barter for bread. The British keep the camps separate because they have seen what happens when you do not. The occupation reports include a section titled Relations with Local Population. The language is careful. Minimal contact reported. Occasional incidents of verbal abuse. Local authorities have been instructed to keep distance. The philosophy is prevention. The reality is proximity. Germans pass the camps on the way to work. Their children ask questions that parents cannot answer without tearing something open. The Jewish survivors hold a funeral at a repurposed cemetery. They hold a memorial for those who cannot be named. A leaflet slips under Karl's door one day. It is in German and Yiddish. It reads, "We are still here." He places it under his notebook. There is a day in September 1945 when the British insist that German municipal officials tour Neuengamme. The photographs of that tour are in archives. Men in suits walk in a line. They look at empty barracks and gallows and ovens. The British officer who accompanies them watches their faces. Part of what he sees is shock. Part is calculation. The algebra of memory begins. What to let in, what to push out, what to forget, what to transmute into a story acceptable at the dinner table. The word collective Schuld, collective guilt, floats in the air like dust from demolished plaster. It is a word that some will accept and others will spit out for the next 20 years. The winter of 1946-47 justifies its name. The hunger winter is not rhetorical. It makes bone. Temperatures stay below freezing for weeks. Coal arrives late or not at all. The British are not indifferent. They are overstretched. Their lorries cannot move what is not there. Karl writes in his notebook, "We eat cabbage with cabbage." He writes, "I steal coal from the yard behind my office and pretend not to see myself." He writes, "We receive an American food parcel at Christmas, and the taste is indecent." He learns to smoke because the cigarettes can be traded and because the smoke gives the stomach something to do. He watches children in his block play with the shells of radios. They make forts of bricks and call them houses. They play rubble games. The denazification files fill shelves. The Sprüchkammern in Bavaria will boast of number of cases processed. The British zone will submit reports with more numbers and fewer words. By 1948, the categories have made their compromises public. Less than 2% of those processed are offenders. The overwhelming majority are followers. Some men who served on party boards produce letters from Jews and foreign workers testifying that they helped them. Some are telling truth, some are trading one kind of currency for another. A chief judge in a Sprüchkammer writes, "We cannot imprison a society." A British legal officer writes, "These are not Nuremberg." The mathematics of guilt has found its equilibrium, not at zero, not at infinity, but at a number that allows trains to run. On 20 June 1948, the currency reform comes like a physics experiment. The Reichsmark vanishes. The Deutsche Mark appears. The lines between official and black market collapse overnight. Shelves fill. The cigarette currency is not destroyed, only demoted. The price of bread stabilizes. The feeling in the city shifts from grey to tin. The arrival of Marshall Plan shipments gives the newspapers photographs they can put on the front page. Bags of flour stacked on a pier. Crates marked with American flags. Care packages assembled by church groups in Ohio and Boston and Birmingham and dropped at German doors with labels that make some recipients cry. The occupation reports note that anti-American sentiment drops. The British shoulder their pride quietly. Their zone receives shipments and brown paper goodwill. They adjust. Karl keeps his job at the housing office. He has become good at numbers that are not about money. He knows that one room can sustain 3 people for a year until someone loses a job or someone is born. He knows that 4 rooms can hold a family and a widow and a refugee and an argument. He knows that if he places expellees in the new houses near the Ulster that should go to skilled workers, he will receive letters and corrections and visits. He knows that if he refuses a bribe, he is righteous and also hungry. He knows that if he accepts a gift, he is fed and also chosen. He moves in the calculus of compromise. It is not heroism. It is not villainy. It is the lived arithmetic of the post-war. The British tighten their administrative structure even as they prepare to hand over to Germans. They sponsor newspapers. Die Welt, founded in Hamburg in 1946, to promote a kind of public speech that uses words like education, democracy, responsibility. They oversee the writing of school books. The school books tell a story. It is the story of German suffering from bombing, flight, expulsion. It is not false, it is incomplete. A Hamburg school book from 1952 contains a photograph of ruins and a caption that reads, "Our city after the terror of the air war." There is a chapter on hunger and rebuilding. There is no chapter on Neuengamme. There is a half page on persecution of Jews. It uses the passive voice. It uses the passive voice. It refers to injustices and abuses. It does not print the number of Jews who lived in Hamburg in 1933 and the number who remained in 1945. That arithmetic is too loud for classrooms in which the math teacher was a party man in 1938 and a respected member of the community in 1952. In 1949, the Federal Republic is declared in Bonn. Hamburg becomes a state in the new arrangement. The Cold War turns denazification into a closed file. The British intelligence summaries observe a shift in priority is now stability, anti-communism, one note reads, political reliability redefined. Men who were too compromised to teach in 1946 become civil servants in 1951 because their anti-communism is useful and the teachers' colleges are not producing enough candidates. Police to be purged in 1947, wear new uniforms in 1953. The occupation files stop using the language of guilt and start using the language of security. The Americans have their airlift in Berlin. The British share the logistics. Hamburg's port becomes a source, a mouth that takes in and spits out. Marshall Plan aid out, German exports in. The city's cranes begin to move. The warehouses smell of coffee again. In 1950, Karl's wife, Lotte, returns. She has walked the edges of the map. She arrives at the housing office one afternoon and asks at the desk if Karl M. works there. He is called out. He has never felt as hungry as he feels then. He writes that line and then crosses it out. He learns she had been evacuated to a rural village, then moved, then married a rumor of safety, then waited. She arrives with a baby who does not live long. They bury the baby in a cemetery where most of the graves have 2 dates, 5 years apart, and no names. They move into a 2-room flat. He can assign himself without making too much noise. He knows how to do this while pretending to fill every line in the ledger like everyone else. They buy chairs with cigarettes. They buy a saucepan with a pair of shoes. They buy the idea of normal life with the currency of not asking questions. An oral history taken in Hamburg in 1961 records a woman saying, "We survived because we went dumb." She means she stopped talking. She also means she dulled the edge of her mind where the facts lived. The strategy was common. Threads of it are visible in court transcripts from late denazification hearings, in letters of reference for Mitläufer, written by men who discovered their rhetorical courage in 1946. It is visible in church newsletters that speak of moral renewal, while hiring back the organist who played at rallies in 1934. It is visible in the Senate's minutes, as it refuses requests to name streets after Social Democrats murdered in 1933, while approving memorials to bombing victims with alacrity. It is the politics of grief management. The port rebuilds. Blohm and Voss reopens as a ship repair yard. The quays come back to life. The city expands not up, but outward, with the careful calculation of municipal planners who think in terms of water supply, sewerage, tram lines, allotment gardens. The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle, although that word will be used. It is a set of policies and shipments and rebuilding incentives, the release of pent-up entrepreneurial energy, the return of competence to offices and factories, the suppression of certain topics in order not to break the machine. The new Deutsche Mark is hard. The interest rates are set by men who will later be called ordoliberals. The factories in Hamburg hum. The cranes swing. The shops fill with goods that make the grim ingenuity of 1946, the making of coffee from roasted barley and acorns, feel like an embarrassment to be folded away. Karl gets used to butter again. He buys a radio, then a smaller second radio. It is in this mid-1950s prosperity that past and present meet in a way that cannot be finessed by a committee. The city's past as a site of fire is invited to host a guest who participated in making that fire. In 1953, a British veterans organization writes to Hamburg's Senate offering to send a delegation to pay respects at St. Nikolai and to advance reconciliation. The letter is filed. It is also read aloud and debated. The British would like a ceremony. The Germans are not sure. The British lecture notes from that meeting survive. "We must be seen together," a British officer says. "We must accept responsibility and condemn the system that necessitated the bombing." The German side speaks of grief on both sides. The meeting ends with plans for a small gathering. It does not happen in 1953. It does in 1959. That year, a group of RAF veterans comes to Hamburg as guests of the Anglo-German Society. Among them is a man named James Whitfield, who flew as a navigator in bombers that took part in Operation Gomorrah when he was 22. He is now 40. He has 2 children and a scar he keeps hidden under a collar. He keeps a diary during the visit. It survives in private hands, and a copy is in the city archives as loan material. He writes on the first day, "The city looks new and also strangely sad. We did that. They did that. We all did that." On the second day, we stand under the spire at St. Nikolai. I look up and down. There are children who do not know what they are being taught about this. The ceremony is small. The Senate sends an undersecretary with a careful speech. A pastor speaks of ashes and growth. There are wreaths. There is a moment of silence. Somebody coughs. Karl stands in the second row. He has been sent by the housing office to represent the city's reconstruction department because the head of office is ill. He wears a suit that fits badly and holds his hat in his hand. He watches the British visitor. He does not know his name. He watches his face as he looks at the spire, which stands like a finger pointing at the past. The British man's mouth tightens when the pastor says, "May we never forget the suffering of our people." The word "our" hangs there. For whose is this memorial? It hangs there, and then it falls. After the ceremony, there is a reception in a room with a view of the water. There are biscuits, there is coffee. An interpreter stands by to help with formalities. Karl does not speak much English. The British visitor speaks a little German. They stand by a window, 2 men the same age who are on opposite ends of the fire and the ledger. They share one exchange that Karl will write down later because he needs to, because his handwriting is the only way he knows to trap a moment. The British man says, "I saw the sky light. We knew what that meant." Karl says, "We sat in the cellars. We heard the sound like a train that never arrived." He puts his hat back on his head, although no one else is wearing one. The British man says, "I am sorry." Karl says, "We should be sorry for what was done in our name." The British man looks at him as if that sentence is an unfamiliar instrument. That is the end of it. There is no reconciliation as the word is printed in newspapers. There is an exchange of sentences like unequal currencies. In the weeks after the visit, the city's papers print a photo of a British veteran and a German official at St. Nikolai. The caption uses the phrase "mutual acknowledgement." The editorial uses the phrase "New Europe." The letter pages hold comments that use other phrases. Some letters say, "We were burned without reason." Some say, "We had it coming." Some say, "The British must admit they killed civilians." Some say, "Let them go home." Most are unsigned. Some come from people who lost children in 1943. Some come from expellees who lost children in 1945 and 1946 on the roads. There is room for all this. There is not enough room. The arithmetic of grief has no solution set that satisfies. The records show that after 1959, the city makes changes to the way it commemorates. The language at St. Nikolai becomes less possessive. A committee forms to integrate the story of Neuengamme into school curricula. The committee includes men who served in low-level roles under the party, and women who were Trümmerfrauen, and a young teacher who will be called a troublemaker by some parents for insisting on a day trip to the camp. The first exhibition on Neuengamme in a municipal museum contains more photographs of German policemen than some would like. It is a start. It is not enough. Bundles of documents sit in rooms where the temperature and humidity are regulated.